Hello and welcome. Today, we journey into one of the most divisive conflicts of the 20th century, the Vietnam War. This wasn't just a war of armies. It was a war of ideas, of truth, and of conscience, a 20-year struggle that would forever change how a superpower saw itself and its role in the world. Throughout the Cold War, America had a playbook. Intervene covertly, achieve the objective, and get out. But Vietnam was different. It became a full-scale, all-in commitment. The stated goal was simple: stop the spread of communism. But the reality on the ground was brutal, complex, and morally fraught, creating a chasm between lofty ideals and devastating actions. At its heart, the Vietnam War was a battle of stories. Washington saw Vietnam through the lens of the domino theory. If one country fell to communism, the rest of Southeast Asia would follow. This view, however, was tragically simplistic. It ignored a century of colonial history, fierce nationalism, and complex internal politics. What America saw as a pawn in a global chess game was, in fact, a nation fighting for its own identity, caught between rival factions and foreign powers. This fundamental misunderstanding set the stage for catastrophe. The slide into full-blown war began with a single controversial event. In 1964, the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, based on disputed reports of an attack on a U.S. destroyer, gave President Lyndon B. Johnson a virtual blank check to wage war without a formal declaration. Expediency took the place of ethical debate. Leaders, relying on shaky intelligence, turned ambiguity into certainty and sent a generation to fight a war they barely understood. It's a chilling lesson. When a government sacrifices transparency for strategy, moral failure isn't just a risk. It's a certainty. For the people of Vietnam, the consequences were apocalyptic. While policymakers in Washington obsessed over body counts and strategic metrics, a human tragedy of unimaginable scale unfolded in villages and rice paddies. Relentless bombing campaigns, the widespread use of toxic herbicides like Agent Orange, and indiscriminate shelling erased the line between soldier and civilian. Homes were incinerated, farmland was poisoned for generations, and entire communities were uprooted. Hundreds of thousands of civilians perished. Millions were left homeless. The invisible threads that hold a society together were torn to shreds. We often see war casualties as statistics, but in Vietnam, they were faces, families, and futures extinguished. This dehumanization reached its horrific climax in March 1968, at a small village called My Lai. There, American soldiers from Charlie Company systematically massacred hundreds of unarmed civilians, women, children, and the elderly. This wasn't just a case of a few rogue soldiers. It was a symptom of a deeper sickness, a systemic failure born from a war that stripped away the humanity of everyone involved. Even more shocking was the cover-up. For over a year, the military and government buried the truth. It took the courage of whistleblowers within the army and the persistence of journalists to expose the massacre to the world. My Lai became a permanent stain, a symbol of not just what war can do to men, but how far institutions will go to hide their darkest secrets. The revelation of My Lai was a turning point for the American public. The question was no longer about winning, but about whether the nation had lost its soul. It exposed a bitter truth. The machinery of war can grind on, justified by necessity, but the moral cost is immeasurable. Then in 1971, the Pentagon Papers were leaked. This secret history of the war, commissioned by the government itself, proved that multiple administrations knew the war was unwinnable. They knew the strategies were failing, yet they repeatedly lied to the public, sending more soldiers to die and more bombs to fall. The deception wasn't an accident. It was policy. The ethical collapse was total. The legacy of Vietnam is deep and complex. For the Vietnamese people, it is a story of immense loss, but also of incredible resilience and survival. For Americans, it became a lesson in the dangers of unchecked power and the folly of strategy divorced from morality. It gave rise to the Vietnam Syndrome, a profound national reluctance to get entangled in foreign wars, coupled with a deep-seated distrust of official government narratives. It left us with an enduring question: how far can a nation go to defend its interests before it sacrifices the very principles it claims to uphold? Throughout the war, the tension between strategy and ethics was never an abstract concept. It was real, manifesting in the choices of presidents, the actions of young soldiers, and the daily suffering of civilians. Vietnam proves that when a government prioritizes its image over the truth, the consequences are paid in blood by those farthest from the halls of power. These ethical compromises are not temporary setbacks. They are wounds that fester across generations. Looking back, we see a tragic mix of ambition, fear, and moral compromise. We see how strategic doctrines can dictate objectives, but it is human conscience that ultimately judges the rightness of an action. The war left scars on everyone it touched: the soldiers who fought, the civilians who suffered, and the nations forced to confront the gap between their rhetoric and their reality. Among the stories of destruction and betrayal, there are also incredible stories of courage, defiance, and moral clarity that challenge any simple notion of victory or defeat. Ultimately, Vietnam forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. With great power comes great moral responsibility. To use force without reflection, to silence truth in the name of strategy, is to invite not only failure but the erosion of trust and the suffering of the innocent. History demands that we learn these lessons, lest we be doomed to repeat them. The choices made in Washington echoed with thunder on the ground in a way leaders rarely foresaw, but that citizens will always endure. And so the story of Vietnam is a timeless and urgent cautionary tale. It's about human choices, institutional failures, and the fragile balance between national interest and moral obligation. History is not just a record of events. It's a reflection of our ethical decisions and their consequences through time. The questions raised by Vietnam remain as pressing today as they were half a century ago. Can nations act in the world without compromising their souls? Can leaders tell the difference between what is necessary and what is merely convenient? Vietnam's memory insists that we keep asking. Thank you for joining us on this difficult but necessary journey. In our next episode, we will travel back to 1945 to confront another monumental decision where strategy and morality collided with world-changing force: the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. If you found this video thought-provoking, please consider liking, subscribing, and hitting the notification bell to continue exploring these crucial moments in history with us. See you next time. Every choice, every story, every moment counts. Subscribe and share to stand with us, and don't miss the next episode of our journey.